All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Cooking Up Health. We are thrilled to have you here. My name is Tiffany Leon, and I will be the moderator tonight. And thank you to Genentech for supporting this series. So let's get cooking. I will hand it over to Tessa.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. We were just talking about it's kind of that in between time between, school's almost out, it's getting hot outside. So I'm trying to think of, recipes that you don't necessarily have to be sitting over the stove or whatever kind of device you have to be cooking. Um, so that way it's just you're getting it on the table, you're able to enjoy it and have fun with your family and friends and get on to the next thing. All right. So today's challenge, as you guys probably saw from signing up, is the Dollar Tree store or Family Dollar, Dollar General, whatever kind of store that you have by you. And I know some are closing down, but whatever it might be. But the challenge really is the focus on three meals that are under $20 each. So not only have I made it all of them top nine allergen friendly, but I'm going to offer some tips and tricks if you want to modify it and or be able to add, some extra crunch, some herbs, other fresh elements to it, but also the cost breakdown for you at the end. So it's still under the $20, even with the extras that we're adding. Okay, so our three recipes today that we're going to be doing are lentil picadillo as the first one, a three bean taco is the second recipe, and the last one is a chickpea stir fry. So again, these, as you might even notice, are all plant-based, which just happens to be the Dollar Tree that I went to that's closest to my neighborhood. Sometimes they have like frozen ground meat or like frozen protein options in, like the coolers that they have in the back of the store. But oftentimes, it just depends on like what kind of stock they have. So I thought these were three great recipes to start that have a variety of vegetables and nutrients and plant protein, and you can either swap that out for like other protein sources that you want to. So chicken, beef, pork, something like that. Excuse me. So it doesn't have to stay like vegan or vegetarian if you don't want it to be. So again, trying to keep it the recipes as I've showed with or shared with you guys earlier, like more templates for you to kind of mix and match, and not necessarily with the hard and fast rules of like you have to do the recipe this way. So just make it your own, and again, modifying like what's in the store or what you have in your pantry or in your kitchen at home too. Okay. So some of you have probably had picadillo before. If you want to like raise your hand or maybe even drop it in the chat. But picadillo literally just means like to mince or to cut like in small pieces. And there's different variations around, and depending on like whatever friend's house you went to, if they're from Dominican Republic, Cuba, wherever it might be, it's kind of like everyone's recipe kind of varies upon the region. So this is just one variation that I made, and it's not like this is the only kind that there is out there, but just kind of the little background of it of like everything's kind of chopped small or in smaller pieces. So it just makes it a really easy eating experience, whether you choose to have it like we have here as a side dish that we're talking about, either, like tortillas or rice. Okay, so our recipes that we're doing today, we have our picadillo that's here in this bottom like left corner. The top, we have our curried chickpeas and veggie stir fry. And then over here on the right hand side, we have the three bean tacos. So just kind of overall what we're doing. But before we talk about the recipes themselves, I wanted to provide like some ingredient background so that it'll help you kind of, as I said before, like using these recipes as templates and kind of building your confidence and knowing that like if you don't have the exact things that I have listed here, you have enough wiggle room to kind of make it your own, and it's still going to turn out great, and it's just going to be your version, and that's totally fine too. So I'm just going to pop these up here. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about are spices. In my Dollar Tree that I went to, I was actually really surprised because oftentimes some of the Dollar Trees I've been to before, their spice selection, whether it's like single spices like salt, pepper, or like blends, is pretty compact in a small section. But this one almost had like a quarter of like a row dedicated to spices specifically. So I just wanted to show we have curry powder that we're using here today. They had tahine, which if you've had before or you make your own, it's like a chili lime salt. So it hits like all those like sour, salty, spicy notes. And we'll be using this, or you can use this as a topping as well. And then garlic powder. So the recipes that I have here, I have them calling for garlic powder and onion powder. And so like if you have fresh, that's great. Use it. If you have, you know, like the minced or whatever, whether it's in your fridge or the freezer, you can use that as well. But I really like the versatility of spices in dried garlic and onions because you know you can keep it in your pantry and it keeps for a long time as long as you keep it nice and dry in like a dark, cool space. And it just really allows you to add a lot of flavor without necessarily having the fresh ingredient. So that's why I just really want to emphasize like you can add layers of flavor with these spices without it necessarily being fresh, and that's perfectly okay. So we have garlic here. And then another thing I think of as like seasoning elements, if you will. I don't know if there's like necessarily a like a terminology for these like seasonal elements. So they had these at my Dollar Tree too, where they're roasted red pepper strips, and then I think there's a couple of garlic cloves in there too. So just thinking of all the recipes, as I mentioned, are pretty basic in terms of the seasoning is very minimal, so that you know if you have more sensitive or picky eaters that prefer to have things kind of by themselves, and then they can choose to add which elements, whether it's like the fresh herbs, some salsa, whatever it might be. I tend to always season things like very blandly or on like the very basic side, so that way everyone can customize it to what they like. And then I'll offer like these on the side, you know, like in little dishes, so you can add, you know, if you want some roasted red pepper strips or some olives or some vinegar, whatever it might be. So those are some options as well. And then, as I said, you know, there's also just plain salt and pepper. There's nothing wrong with that. It's always the two staples. And then something that I always use too is MSG. And I know this is maybe a controversial one, but MSG is naturally found in so many foods, whether it's different proteins, mushrooms, tomatoes. So it just really adds that savory umami taste. And especially if you're worried about yourself or your loved ones, worried about the sodium content of the food that you're eating, a good way to be able to cut back on the salt that you're using is to use about half and half. So like half MSG mixed with half of the amount of salt. And it just really boosts that umami savoriness of the dish. So you got those. And then this one was at the store. And I know, as I mentioned, everything that I've selected here and have out is top 9 allergen friendly. But again, you know, making sure that you're reading labels and making sure it's safe for yourself and your loved ones or friends and families that you're cooking for at home. And this was one of the ones that was not like a soybean like vegetable oil. So I thought that was really cool to see this. So it's sunflower and pomace olive oil. So again, being able to have like cooking condiments and cooking staples ready to go kind of allows you to season things how you'd like. And then something that was really cool, I know, again, the brand doesn't matter, but just so there's this like Cajun style, so maybe spicy little elements of garlic, cumin, and then like a lemon pepper seasoning too with garlic and extra citrus. So whether you're wanting to just be like, I'm just gonna do salt and pepper, like leave it as is okay. Or if you're like, ooh, maybe we can like sprinkle some of this on the side. There's a lot of options. So don't be scared to kind of test and mix and match and maybe that be something fun for you know, you and your friends or you and your kids, whoever you're cooking for, to be able to like mix and match what makes sense for you and what tastes good. So I want to just talk about those. Bring these over here. And then another element I wanted to talk about is the variety of the pantry, or like more when you think of like a pantry as in like no refrigeration or like a cooling element in the products that we use today. So again, brands do not matter. It's just making sure that it's safe for us. So reading the ingredients and then being able to use it in the different recipes that you have. So my dollar store, as I mentioned, like really had a huge section, not only of the spices, but of different canned goods. So from different vegetables, there's tons of different fruits, different like condiments and sauces. So that's where, like I said, with the condiments and sauces, of course, having to be careful and reading the labels. And not a lot of them were allergen friendly or like top 9 allergen free. So again, that's why I like the emphasis of using the spices separate. So that way we know it's safe and being able to make it match like your flavor, your taste profile that you want to go for. So then we have like, there's a salsa here. and then the different canned vegetables that we're using within the recipes today. And then I used a mixture of dried and canned beans in one of the recipes. And it's just because I had dried beans that I wanted to use up and put into the tacos. So soaking beans, of course, takes a little bit of time because you have to think of like, okay, if I'm going to make my beans tomorrow, I need to soak them in water overnight. So it just takes a lot of time. And if you don't have that, whether you don't want to or just don't have the time, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Use the canned beans or the canned lentils, whatever canned option is just as good as the other. So don't be afraid to take those convenience like shortcuts to help make the dish get on the table faster because they're just as nutritious as one another. It's just an amount of like how much time or effort you want to put into it. So there's no shame in any option that you choose. So we got these, and hopefully don't spill them everywhere. Not that I've done that before. Okay, and then the kind of seasoning elements or extras, I guess, we'll talk about here. So the same thing when we talked about convenience factors. And convenience, I just mean something that's easier for you. So what's convenient for me might not be convenient for you, vice versa. So just having options is really nice, especially now, like at the Dollar Tree for this example, like they have like this where it's this one's a pound. Yeah, this one is a pound of like dry uncooked rice, which would be great that I can store it in my pantry, just keep it dry and away from moisture and it keeps fine. Or if I'm like, I have zero energy to cook, I don't want to make rice, I don't want to make boil water, whatever it might be. These are great too. And that you can see I already opened it. These are, I think almost all of them are like 90 seconds. So they cook really fast where I think you just like kind of tear a little bit of the top of the package and you microwave it and then the rice is already done. So take those shortcuts if and when you want them. And again, there's no nutritional difference really between these. Just making sure you read the ingredients that this one uses canola and sunflower oil to keep the grains of the rice separate. So just making sure you're still reading labels, but again, take the convenient option if it works for you. And then we're doing the same thing for our tacos later too. So we have them in, these are the brands that were at the store that I had. So these are like the traditional kind of like taco shells. And if you're like me and you get really excited sometimes and you're like, and then it cracks, don't throw them out. It's the same thing as like if you think of like a nacho chip or even really like the tostadas that we have here. So if you just toast them, it's the same thing. So it just creates it into like a nacho kind of scoop situation versus a taco. So however you want to serve that is perfectly fine too. Just kind of using what you have. And then I love tostadas too because, as long as you don't get them kind of crunched up, they stay pretty well. And just like, it's basically like, I'll show you. Try to open it over here so it's not crinkling in your ear. But this is just basically just means like a toasted corn tortilla. So that way when you get it, it's just like this. The same thing where we have the tacos that we have like this, you can serve it like that, or you can just pour it on top of this and eat it as that. So it's really up to you to kind of choose your eating adventure, if you will, with these. And the last thing I wanted to mention too is this is ground beef I did not buy from the Dollar Tree. Like I said, they typically have it there, but sometimes with now that it's summer and like kids are getting out of school, some of the stuff like kind of rotates what's in stock. But they often do have ground beef where the Dollar Tree that I shop at. So even though all the recipes today, as I mentioned, are vegan and vegetarian friendly because we're using plant protein with the beans and the lentils, you can definitely add in, if you have in the freezer, some like ground meat, you have some leftover like shredded chicken from a rotisserie chicken. It's totally up to you. And then I also love these too, where there is canned white meat chicken that's available at the Dollar Tree as well. So there's really a lot of options where if you don't really, maybe you don't love beans, like that's totally fine. So just swap it out for a protein you want. Or if you're like, maybe my kids like kind of are okay on beans, but like I want to introduce it to them. So maybe I mix like half ground beef and half beans. So there's really a lot of options for you. And again, just mixing and matching what you have on hand, foods you like, um, and what's available at your store too. So I know I went through that kind of quickly, but I wanted to talk about that first, so that way you have like that frame of like being able to customize before we even jump into these. And then is that a question or is just a comment?
Hi, Catherine. Yeah, you should be seeing the second camera that has the screen showing the spices and the beans and all of the ingredients for the dishes. And if you can't, you can send me a message separately.
Right. So now that I was able to nerd out on food ingredients with you, we're going to jump into making our lentil picadillo. So like, as I said, this is kind of the finished one. And for this, I did use the microwave rice and then our picadillo. And this is made without, it's to this recipe here that it's made with the lentils and not the ground beef. So again, options there to mix and match with what you have. And so, as I mentioned earlier, these are the elements that we're using for the picadillo. And this over here. And something I wanted to mention too is, as I said, it's getting hot outside. Some of us, your eczema might be already flaring, as you can probably see. Um, and it's hot. We're tired. We're working hours on end, whatever it might be. We're being caretakers. We're being family members, partners, whatever it might be. So there's a lot that we're balancing, and especially as we're going into this next season. And I really wanted to be cognizant and aware of that. So even though these recipes talk about, using like a stove or some sort of heating element like this to cook, honestly, you can make a lot of these, whether it's in like a slow cooker or if you have like an instant pressure cooker, something like that, or even in the microwave. So like these I did do on the stove, but I tested out some of them and you can do it in the microwave too. But the one thing to keep in mind is, since the picadillo recipe for this, we're using, the different spices there. We have the olives that are here, green olives. If you don't like green olives, use black olives. If you don't like olives, you can keep them out too. Totally up to you. Um, and then we also have diced tomatoes, which we are already mixed in. And then we have potatoes. So here are the canned potatoes that come out really nice. So they're already cooked and they're diced up pretty fine into like bite-sized pieces. So again, as we talked about picadillo with it being minced or like those bite-sized pieces. And then we have our canned carrots. And then I either forgot to get the canned green peas or just spaced on it somehow, but I had frozen peas. So the same thing, whether you have frozen veggies of these or canned, fresh, whatever it is, make it work, because it's really about mixing and matching. So it's not going to really make a difference because we're still adding in these frozen peas towards the end because we don't want them to be mushy. And the same with the carrots, because the carrots, I'm just going to do this so you can see, they're really soft and already cooked. And we don't want those to be mushy in the picadillo either. So that's why we're cooking the potatoes, the olives, the tomatoes, and the lentils together first. And so the point I was trying to make about the lentils is the same about our beans. So beans are something, if you make them from, when someone says from scratch or just from dry, really, you have to soak these overnight in water, or you don't have to, but traditionally you soak them in like, a big bowl of water, rinse them, and then soak them in water so that they can rehydrate, and then you cook them. So it just takes a longer time to make them from dry. And so that's why I often swap for, whether it's canned beans, but with lentils, as you can see the size, let me show you the size of these in case you haven't looked at them before. So these, like a mix of beans, but these are like black beans. And then in my right hand here, I have lentils. So you see the size is very different. And so the black beans are really full and there's like those two sides. Then lentils are rather flat and small. So lentils take a shorter cooking time, and you don't have to soak them before you cook them from dry or from scratch like this. Um, but if you're still like, yeah, I'm not doing that, they have canned lentils too. Totally fine to do that. Okay, so our picadillo, like I said, So the carrot is like soft, right? And then, okay, so we're talking about our lentils. So the lentils, you don't have to soak overnight because they're small. And then I'll show you guys the beans again too. So here's the beans when they're dried. And then these are the lentils when they're dried. So lentils typically take anywhere from like 20, 25 minutes to 30 minutes to cook all the way through when you're simmering them in some liquid. In this case, we have the tomatoes, potatoes, and the olives together. Um, and so with that, that's why I liked using the lentils because it takes such a short amount of time to cook. And like I was saying, if you want to make this like a microwave meal instead of cooking it on the stove, it'll take even less time if you swap, the lentils for like a can of beans or a can of lentils because everything's cooked, the carrots, the peas, the olives, the potatoes, and the beans or lentils that you use are all cooked. So it's really a matter of just kind of heating it up and having everything get nice and hot together. So again, that's another way because, as we mentioned, it's getting hot during summer and saving electricity and the like energy that you're expending to cook this too. So there are some options there. And then I also wanted to talk about, so these are the canned potatoes, as I mentioned. And I think like at store, like I've seen before where the potatoes will come, like they'll not shave them down. They'll peel them down to like little like bite-sized potatoes. So they're still kind of round, but maybe like the size of like large marbles. And then this one, they're cut into like little cubes. So these potatoes are already cooked. And then I also saw that these, even though they're hash brown potatoes, if you've seen these before, they're just dried potatoes. So that just means that they've been, cut up and then dehydrated. So all the moisture has been removed from them. So it kind of looks like just little shreds like this. So another option is if you don't have, whether it's potatoes at home, if you don't have canned potatoes, shredded potatoes like this, or like if you have hash brown potatoes, that would work fine too. It's just a matter of using what you have. And I just thought this would be a cool kind of thing. You just have to add, like this one, I think, yeah, you just add hot water up to this line and let it sit for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then these will rehydrate. Or what I think would work too is if you're simmering this on the stove or you're cooking it in the microwave, if you add it in dry and add in like some chicken stock or some broth or even water, that extra water allows the potato to hydrate, but also cook and melt into the picadillo itself. So a lot of options there. And so once we combine all these together, this is what we end up with. And so you see it's really thick. And as I mentioned before, I don't have it on here, but if you want it more like soupy, like the texture or like the consistency of the picadillo itself, if you want it to be, I prefer it kind of like this, where it's like wet, but it's pretty together. It's like stew. I'll go light on whether it's the water or like the chicken broth or vegetable broth that I add to it. Or if you want it a little bit more soupy, then you can add some more liquid. So again, it's kind of like up to you to not only just the spices and the seasoning to your taste, but also like the consistency of what you want that to be when you eat it. So this is delicious as is, but as we showed here, you can serve it like this. So we have the rice here, and again the tortillas. So we have like the tortillas that I shared earlier, whether they're like tostadas or like chips. But I also like these two, which are, I mean, they're basically like tortillas because they're still corn chips, but more of like the Frito style, if you will. And again, like brand doesn't matter, just making sure that the ingredients are safe for you. That's just another option. So any questions on the picadillo before we go on to the next one? That's
Is
not bad.
I have
Oh,
a question, Tessa.
mhm.
Is this something best served hot, or is it something
Yes,
that you can also enjoy the next day, but cold?
both. I know some people are weird about like cold food, but excuse me, kind of like soup where like you make it the first day and you're like, oh, this is so good. But then you let it sit in the fridge and then like you eat it the next day and it's so good because it's had time to like all the spices and stuff kind of marry and come together. So I'd say try both and see what you like, but traditionally it is served warm or hot after you make it. But I do like the idea of this because like I said, I do prefer it to be a little bit thicker. So like in the theme of like thickness, as it sits and marinates overnight, like it'll get nice and richly flavored the next day too.
Awesome. I enjoy leftovers, but I know some people do not. And sometimes when it is leftover, I do enjoy eating it cold. So I'm like, I was asking. Thank
Yeah,
you.
because you're like, I've already cooked it, so like, do I have to heat it up again? And
Right.
that's actually a good point too, because with this being in this case, like I said, vegan, because we're using or vegetarian or excuse me, not necessarily vegan or vegetarian, depending on if you use chicken or vegetable broth. But in terms of like our protein source here is or are like the lentils and beans. So like that the texture of that like cold doesn't bother me, or like you think of different salads you have cold beans in it. So that's not ever really an issue. But if you're like have maybe like shredded chicken or ground beef or something, you're like, oh, maybe the texture cold isn't great. Like I think it's just a personal preference thing at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it's ready to go. Eat it hot. Enjoy it pretty immediately.
Yes. But that's
Sounds
also
good.
assuming there's gonna be leftovers. So I hope not, but we'll
That's
see.
true. No, that's true. All right. Well, I'm
Um,
looking forward to your next dish.
all right, so our next recipe is going to be our three bean tacos. So again, on this one, I served it super plain. Because like the main recipe, like I said, is very much like that. And I say super plain in that all the recipes, as is the basic one, is still very nutrient dense, and it has like all the food groups represented, and it's a great hearty meal. And it's just a matter of like customizing the things that you want to add on the side or add into while you're cooking. So it's totally up to you. And then also with these tortilla or the taco shells too. So elements that we have here, and you're gonna be like, stop bringing these beans over here. But I just really want to emphasize like, there's nothing wrong with taking shortcuts and taking the convenience factor, because again, like there's a reason why these options are out there, because not all of us want to or have the desire to like make everything from scratch, and like that's totally fine. So I think being able to take those options when we want it is like important too. And I think that really, like even as a chef, sometimes people like judge for using quote unquote convenience products, but it's like what's convenient for you and what's convenient for me might be totally different. So like the same thing with your cooking, like there there's no shame or there shouldn't be any judgment involved in like how you're able to provide a meal for yourself or how you're able to provide a meal for your family and friends. So I just think it's really important that we keep this like top of mind of like the dignity and respect that comes with like being able to cook a meal for ourselves. And so with that comes the choice of choosing if you want to use the dry beans or the pinto beans. And like, so these ones I put out earlier, so they're getting a little dry now. Maybe they're reverting back from cooked to dry beans, but so you can see like how soft they are. And again, if you're like, oh, I don't like kidney beans, I don't like white beans, blah blah blah. Like, I just use three beans because it's nice, like colorful, different flavors and elements. But you can use like one of one type of bean that you really love and just season it up. It's totally up to you. Um, or something I was thinking about too, especially with like pinto beans, is so when I cook it down, when we add like the salsa. So this is the salsa that came in that little jar that I was showing you guys earlier. But as you've probably seen in the stores too, like sometimes it comes in a can like this, or it might come in like a glass bottle with like a twist top to take it off. Um, Either one is totally up to you. And then something I also wanted to talk about is they didn't have, or maybe I just didn't get it. I think I probably just got plain, but they also have the diced tomatoes that are with like green chilies or with spices mixed in. And you can definitely use that instead of like the salsa if you can't find it at your store, or if you're just like, this is easier to use that. So again, some options for you to choose what's available in the store, what you like, and just whatever you want to put into there, really. And you can make it as spicy or as mild as you want to. But like I said, I tend to go on the more like milder side and put the spicy elements on the side so that everyone can add as much or as little of those things as they want to. Because I know, at least personally, my spice tolerance is a lot higher than other people's, as I've noticed. So we don't want to like blow everyone out of the water with this spice content. All right, so we got those. And so what I was talking about with the beans is, so once we cook this down and I added, um, just because even though the beans are cooked already, and the canned beans are already cooked and they're soft as you saw, they're like nice and soft and squishable. I really love beans in general are delicious, but just like the texture when it comes and gets like nice and silky and smooth and soft. So I actually cooked this down with a little bit of the stock that I got from the store, which this is, I was also surprised because with these being top 9 free too. They have beef flavored broth and chicken flavored broth. I don't think they had veggie or vegetable at the time that I was there, but I just used the chicken broth and just kept adding and stirring and cooked it down. And you can see like it created like a little bit of like this sauce that's like really delicious that would go good with that. And there's a few options here. Like if we want like this, where we had it as the traditional tacos, right? So then you can just kind of strain it out a little bit and then add it into here. So you create the tacos, add in, we want to add in like some green onions, or we have like, you can see how hot it is in my apartment. This cilantro is sorry guys. Or some cilantro, some allergy-friendly, like dairy-free, like sour cream or like dairy replacement kind of thing they can drizzle on top. Salsa, as we mentioned, any sorts of things like that to kind of jazz this up, or as is. Um, but I even love this, like I would probably eat this like a bowl of this, like with the beans and the sauce, like ladle over some rice and just like eat it like that. Or one of my other favorite things to do is, not that these are like traditional refried beans, because we're not adding we're not like using manteca or like lard or butter and then like cooking the beans in it. But you could use like a potato masher, or if you have like an immersion blender, or even just a spoon or fork, because these are so soft, and just start like kind of mashing it so it creates a thicker texture. And then you could spread it on one of our tostadas, so like that. So then the texture is, it's like, kind of chunky smooth, where you can spread it on and it has it so it's not going to fall off, but it also the substance of like being able to eat it well on the tostada. So there's a lot of options with this one. So again, like all of these have so many different ways. It's kind of like those books where it's like choose your adventure. Like you start with the main ingredients and can really kind of go whichever direction you want to. So there we have that one, nice and simple. And then I know Tiffany had asked us about the other one, but the same thing with this. Like it's gonna taste great today, but once this sits overnight, the pot liquor, or like we call it like pot liquor, like from greens and stuff that you cook, but like the pot liquor from the beans the next day is going to be phenomenal. So sometimes what I'll do, especially like for a pot of beans like this, because we eat beans, like we eat so many beans, I'll make like a larger batch, because I know like I don't want to cook it several times throughout the week, and especially when it's hot. So you just have like a kind of a large pot, keep it in the fridge, and every time you need some, just kind of serve it out or whatever it is. And just like it's a really great nutrient dense and lots of protein and fiber in there that keeps you nice and full too, and an inexpensive dish as well. And so if there aren't any questions, I'll break into the cost breakdown for this as well. Okay, so for this recipe, as is, like as the tacos, it is $10. So that is just the beans and the tomatoes. And again, if you ended up just doing like one type of beans, or you opted to just like make one bag of the beans, then it'll be a little bit less expensive. And then with the optional add-on items of serving it with like rice or the tortilla chips would be about $12.50. And then other optional items that weren't at the dollar store. So like you want to do shredded like allergy-friendly cheese, or the cream, or like the sour cream that I was talking about, onion, cilantro, those types of things, it's still $16.50. So again, another really great versatile kind of main element that you can make different ways for less than $20. So any questions on that one before we do our last recipe together?
And that's $20 for the entire recipe, and you can break it out into various servings, whether you're super hungry and want 2 servings, or there's 4 people and so it's $20 for the entire meal, and
Yes,
you can split it up
exactly.
depending on the people eating with you.
Exactly. And like I said, I definitely went on like the more generous end and that actually per recipe it's probably less, but like I did it based on like I paid $1.25 for like this bag of rice. So I'm just gonna do $1.25. Not that you're necessarily cooking all of this rice, but just it gives you
Right.
that buffer of like how hungry are
This is
you?
this is the amount of money that you would need to come to bring with you to the store to buy these items. It doesn't mean you're consuming every single bite of all these items in this entire meal because you have rice for another day.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you for like reminding me about that because I know it's not clear. Like it'll be clear like in the slides breakdown, but sometimes like I'm a visual learner too, so like hearing it sometimes doesn't make as much sense. So our last recipe we have here today is our chickpea stir fry. And again, you guys will get slides with all the recipes on here. And as I mentioned, I keep it relatively simple in terms of the ingredients that we're adding. And again, kind of going from there, modifying depending on your taste preferences or who you're cooking for, things like that. And so the first ingredient we have, so as I mentioned, the dollar store that I have or the Dollar Tree that I shop at has a frozen section. So I was really excited because they had a like huge actual section of like frozen vegetables and fruit. And so this one was like a stir fry blend, but really any sort of blend of vegetables, or if you're like, oh, I don't like broccoli, like use whichever vegetables that you enjoy or like. So this one has broccoli and it has some yellow bell pepper, some little sweet sugar snap peas, and then some carrot slices as well. And so, I mean, it's soft now because we've been, it's hot in here, as I've mentioned, but also just like it's been sitting out, so it hasn't been in the freezer. And then the chickpeas too, you can see it's starting to get a little dry, but that's okay. But the same thing too. I didn't cook these from scratch. I just bought a can of the chickpeas or garbanzo beans, however you call them, and then rinse them off in water. And then these are just the beans that we're using. And again, if you're like, I don't like chickpeas, don't use chickpeas. If you're like, I just want to do the veggies, just do the veggies. It's totally fine. Um, Again, really taking into, okay, the protein. I mean, there's definitely protein from the veggies of like the sugar snap peas, but adding in whatever protein that you like or swapping out for the beans that you do prefer. So we have that. And then curry powder, which this is from the dollar store. And curry powder is really just like a blend of spices. So the same way that like you go to like a barbecue place, for example, it's like, oh, this is like auntie's spice rub. Like, well, what's in it? It's like custom to like what she likes, right? Or if you go to another place, it's like Bill's famous barbecue rub, whatever it is. So like curry powder is the same way in that it's not just like, oh, curry powder, everything looks like this. It just means like a blend of spices. So that's why I also wanted to mention, so we have the curry powder and then the spice blends we talked about earlier. So like this one is like Cajun style, and this is the lemon pepper. So if you're like, I don't know if I'm really gonna love this, or maybe I want to try one of these instead, like this is a great way for you to use like a spice blend in this case to create like all those flavors. And again, making sure that it's safe, reading the ingredients and everything like that. But just like a great way for you to try out different ones. And again, the brand doesn't matter. These are just the ones that were at the dollar store. So we have those. And literally, it's like as easy as you can put it in a bigger bowl like this, just because I think it's fun for kids to, whether if you want to use clean hands and mix it, but maybe not with curry powder, because you see I got a little bit on my finger, but that's okay. Um, and just mixing it together. So you can just sprinkle in the curry powder like this, as much or as little as you want to. And also keeping in mind that curry powder, depending on the brand and like the label on it too, sometimes it'll be with sodium or with salt in it, or without salt. So again, if that's something that you're keeping in mind, like, and just in general wanting to like make something seasoned well but not necessarily salty, just keeping that in mind when you use some of these that might have salt already mixed into the spice blend. So this is the one I was thinking specifically would be great for the microwave because our beans are done, or sorry, our canned beans, chickpeas are already cooked, and the frozen vegetables, when they're frozen, it just takes a few minutes in the microwave. So really, like you could just have your little kind of mix it up like this, put it in the microwave, and it's good to go. So it's not super simple, or it is super simple. It's not super complicated, but again, it's a great way to try out I think of like some of my littles are really specific of like textures and colors, which I'm sure if any of you are parents, caretakers, know somebody who's a little kid, you know, they're very, very particular about a lot of different things. And so I like this as a way to like introduce whether it's a new vegetable or it's a new spice or maybe it's a new color or shape, whatever it might be. And getting them in the kitchen because it kind of gets them excited to see like, oh, like I made this and like now I want to try it. So really, really kind of nursing that like curiosity and getting them involved is really exciting too. Especially like, you know, when I think of when I was a kid with food allergies too, you're like, there's so much out there that uh, isn't safe for them to cook with. So like being able to do this in a somewhat controlled environment with somebody who, you know, has gone through and made sure like the ingredients are safe and things like that. I think it's a really empowering thing, especially for people with food allergies, and just like being able to create something that they're able to eat afterwards is really fun. And so you can serve this with, so I have, you know, the microwave rice we talked about. You can use your rice cooker or cook the rice on the stove from scratch. And I found these things were really fun. They're called potato sticks, and I think the brand that we used to eat, like that was at the dollar store when I was younger, it came in like a tin, like a round tin. But the same thing of like, this is like super fun and nutritious. And then sometimes you want just like a little crunchy something on top. So like always thinking of different tastes and textures. So like this crunchy element with like the spicy smoothness of the vegetables. I think that sometimes like we were talking about like I'm a cool dietitian, not a regular dietitian. Like we have to have fun with our food too. And like part of the enjoyment of cooking is like having those fun foods too, and like having some crunchy potato sticks on our curry, like that's just like a fun option to do. So just thinking of ways to make it exciting. And I think this would also be good when like we had the chicken earlier. So if you're like maybe they wouldn't be wild about the beans, like maybe we can just do like canned chicken or frozen chicken, whatever it might be, and any kind of protein like that. But I'll have the breakdown for you here of the cost. And so as is, as you can see, very minimal ingredients, $8.75 to make the recipe, like Tiffany was saying, to go into the store to buy the ingredients you need, $8.75. And then the optional items of rice and like chili sauce. So chili sauce I thought would be cool. They have it at the dollar store that I was at, but they were like out of stock, but they had the sign for it where it's like sambal or some sort of like Asian Thai chili sauce. So that way you can like make it spicy if you want to. Or they also have like the sweet chili sauce so that like it's sweet enough and just a touch of chili. So that way if you're whether the kids are just getting used to spice or you're cooking for a crowd that you're not sure of like the spice level, there's options there. So with the options of the rice and the chili sauce, it's $11.25. And then the optional items not sold at the Dollar Tree, including, and I just did something simple. So just like some green onions to be able to chop and like put on top would be $12.25. So again, way under the $20 budget that we kind of allotted for it. But really there's a lot of room there if, you know, if you're able to save, like, for example, like you're going to the Dollar Tree and this one costs $8.75, right? Then you're like, okay, then I can save that remaining like 11, 12-ish dollars to go to the grocery store and pick maybe those certain elements that I want to be fresh or frozen or whatever it might be. That's maybe a bigger selection than that's at the dollar store. So I think that's nice to kind of allow you that extra wiggle room of your budget because we all know like our budget can only go so far sometimes, especially now groceries are very expensive. So you're still able to create this really nutritious, delicious meal and then customize it to like your flavor preferences.
I think my son would really love these meals because there were elements of chips in almost in all of them. But
Yes.
I appreciate them as a mom, as a dietitian, just as someone, you know, as a fair staff, because they do look so well-rounded, so nutritious, but they're also free from the top nine. My son might even want to eat a vegetable if they're served this way.
That makes me excited to hear that.
The
Because I
other
think,
thing is, the other thing
no,
is
go ahead.
that I didn't see a knife at all, and if
No.
you're cooking with little ones, I mean, maybe there's a can opener. Obviously, the adult should be handling the can
Yes.
opener. Even I struggle with that sometimes. But there's no, I didn't see any sharp utensils. If you're going to use the immersion blender or if you're going to use like some of those other elements to, bring it to another level or change the textures, of course, supervision. But if
Yeah.
we're, mixing and stirring and kind of breaking things apart, I think could be really fun for the little ones.
Especially like as long as the elements are cool, they're not like hot. Like even you like don't put your hands in something hot, but yeah, like just the tactile element. And that's what I completely forgot to say that, but thank you for bringing that up, Tiffany, of like we didn't use like I didn't use knives. The only thing is making sure like not all of the cans have those pop top lids.
Yes.
So if making sure like you have a to either purchase a can opener while you're at the store or if you have one at home too.
Yeah, I
But
think my son always enjoys spending time with me in the kitchen. Sometimes it's rolling out dough, or sometimes it's chopping strawberries or something. He has like child safe knives, but for this, there were no knives involved at all. Maybe a spoon. Of course, yeah, we don't want them to be touching really hot things. You don't want to be serving them really hot things either. So of course there is safety precautions in the kitchen. But even, sprinkling the seasonings, I noticed in the last recipe, when you're talking about the addition of curry powder or adding some of the other spices, they can have fun sprinkling it in the bowl. You didn't really give
yeah.
specific measurements, so they can just sprinkle it in, just adding participating in the meal can go a long way, not only in just like a bonding, memory making experience, but also maybe they'd like to try it.
Yes. You're like, please try this. But I think it also just shows like, and if you've attended the classes before, even the other recipes that I've showcased, like I just try to do minimal kind of prep things because like not everybody has like a restaurant grade kitchen, which is fine, but like you can see like we made three really delicious, healthy, well balanced meals that are really tasty and like it didn't require all this extra equipment. So really kind of bringing down the level of that um like really respectable, delicious food has to be like super fancy and require all these tools. Like you can see like that's not the case.
Yeah, I think you made it look super easy. We did 3 recipes in under 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And the family can eat well and be full. I know we talked about this already, but these are really good proteins. You have carbohydrates in here, you have different vegetables. So I mean, you did an amazing job. Does anyone have any questions for Chef Tessa before we wrap it up? I did drop the survey in the chat and I can drop it in again. We hope that you were cooking along with us. If you have any pictures you want to share, please send them to Amber. She added her email up here also in the chat, and we want to see.
So they have fresh veggies at the Dollar Tree. Not at mine, but I'm not sure if maybe other folks have. So I'm based in Michigan, and like the Dollar Tree, I was just amazed to see like like a frozen like refrigerated section and pantry. But I've heard of some places that have like maybe minimal like bananas or apples or something like that. But I have not seen that at mine, so I don't know if anyone else
I
has
was
seen.
I was gonna say perhaps hand fruit like a banana or oranges. I can
Yeah,
Um, the one that I used to go to in New York, I believe, did have bananas somewhere near the counter, but there was definitely a refrigerator and a frozen section there with, various
yeah.
vegetables and fruits too. Thank you guys all for joining. We're just about at the top of the hour. I know you have lovely, delicious meals to be eating, so hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your night and hope to see you at our next session.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you all.